There are places where time stands still, where the air feels heavy with something unseen, something sacred. One of those places was an old church, hidden in the hills, forgotten by most but not by God. The paint was peeling, the benches were cracked, and yet there was a presence there that no age could erase. For years, people walked through those doors, sang their hymns, whispered their prayers, and left, never realizing that within those very walls, a message had been waiting. Not written in ink, not carved in stone, but placed there by Jesus himself, a message meant for this generation. And friend, when that message was finally uncovered, it didn't just reveal words. It revealed a truth so powerful, so personal, it shook the hearts of everyone who heard it. Because it wasn't just a message for a church long forgotten. It was a message for you. Stay with me, because before this story ends, you're going to see how the same Jesus who walked through ancient towns and healed the broken still leaves messages for his people today, hidden in the walls of our churches, and sometimes in the walls of our hearts. There's something almost sacred about forgotten places. The way they hold the whispers of those who once believed, the way dust settles like time's quiet confession over what was once holy. Imagine walking into an ancient church, the kind where every echo feels alive. Every flicker of light through the stained glass carries a memory. The air is thick, not with emptiness, but with presence. Like the walls themselves are watching, waiting for someone to notice what they've held all this time. That's where it all began. A simple step through a creaking wooden door into a place long abandoned. The pews sat silent, the altar cracked, and yet there was a sense, an undeniable pull, that this was not just an old church. Something was hidden here, not in gold or relics, but in meaning. As sunlight broke through the dusty windows, a faint shimmer caught the eye on the far wall. It wasn't paint. It wasn't shadow. It was something more, something deliberate. The wall, half broken and scarred with age, revealed a strange indentation, like someone long ago had left a message for those who would come after. You could almost feel it, the divine intention. This wasn't the work of an artist or a craftsman. It felt like a signature from heaven itself, a moment where eternity brushed against time. The quiet began to speak, and suddenly the forgotten church was no longer silent. The strange markings revealed faint traces of words buried under years of decay. The letters were almost erased, yet somehow they pulsed with life. As the layers of dirt and plaster fell away, one phrase emerged clearer than the rest. It read, "I am still here." And in that instant, the atmosphere changed. You could almost hear the sound of a heartbeat. Not human, but heavenly. The message wasn't just carved in stone. It was written for the soul. You see, we often think that when our churches grow quiet, when our hearts grow cold, when faith feels forgotten, that God must have moved on. But what if he never did? What if the silence isn't absence, but invitation? What if, like those walls, our lives too have hidden messages? Truths that only reveal themselves when we're willing to look deeper, scrape away the dust, and stand still long enough to hear the whisper that says, "I am still here." That hidden phrase wasn't just an inscription. It was revelation. It was as if heaven itself had waited patiently for centuries for someone to uncover it. And when it was found, it didn't just awaken curiosity. It awakened faith. People who had long stopped believing began to return to that little church, not because of what they saw with their eyes, but because of what they felt in their spirit. The message reached beyond walls, beyond generations, beyond logic. Sometimes God hides his voice in the cracks of our own stories, in the places we think are ruined, abandoned, or unworthy. But if we dare to look closely, we might find that even in the darkest corners, his fingerprints remain. That ancient message wasn't only about a church. It was about all of us, a divine reminder that no matter how far we wander, his presence lingers still, waiting to be found. And when you finally realize that, when your eyes open to see what was hidden all along, your heart will whisper the only words that fit the moment. He was here the whole time. There's a moment in every story of faith when what seems ordinary suddenly becomes extraordinary. When what we've walked past 100 times begins to speak in ways we never expected. That's what happened next. The discovery inside those old church walls was only the beginning. Because when the carvings were exposed and the light finally touched the message, something strange began to unfold. Something no one could explain with reason alone. It wasn't just words written in stone. It was as if those words carried a presence. People began to notice that when they stood near that wall, they felt something, a stirring deep within. A warmth that couldn't be described, like standing too close to a holy fire that doesn't burn but transforms. And it wasn't confined to one person's imagination. It spread. Visitors, workers, even skeptics, they all felt it. You could sense it in the air, like heaven was leaning in. You see, when God decides to reveal something, he does it not to impress the mind, but to awaken the heart. Those ancient markings weren't a relic of history. They were a divine reminder that his message isn't trapped in time. It lives, it breathes, it moves through every generation. What was once hidden in the walls was now speaking directly to the souls of those who had forgotten how to listen. And what did it say? Not through words alone, but through experience. It said, "I was never gone." Those 5 words echoed in the hearts of everyone who entered that place. People would walk in burdened, questioning, uncertain, and walk out changed. Not because of the beauty of the church or the mystery of the discovery, but because they encountered something living within it. It was as though the presence of Jesus himself was breathing through those walls, whispering to the weary, the lost, the doubting. It makes you wonder. How many places in our lives have we declared empty, when in truth they're still sacred? How many times have we assumed God was silent, when he was simply waiting for the noise to stop, so we could hear him again? That's what this moment revealed. The miracle wasn't in the stone, it was in the stillness. It was in the way hearts opened when truth was revealed not as a doctrine, but as an encounter. The atmosphere around that church began to change. People came not to see old carvings, but to feel that nearness, that undeniable pull of grace that reminded them they weren't abandoned. And as they stood there, some wept, others fell silent, and a few simply knelt down, realizing that they were standing in a place where heaven had once touched earth, and perhaps still did. It's easy to look at a wall and see stone, to look at a life and see nothing special. But sometimes the most powerful messages are hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to see them through the eyes of faith. The hidden message in those walls wasn't just about a church. It was about every heart that has ever felt forsaken, every believer who has ever wondered if God had forgotten them. And maybe that's why it was revealed now. Because we live in a world where so many feel lost, so many have closed their hearts to the possibility of divine presence. But this moment, this revelation was a reminder that no matter how long it's been, no matter how broken the structure may look, his message has never faded. It was never gone. And if you listen closely enough, you'll realize it's still speaking. When the message was first revealed, it drew people because of its mystery. But what happened next proved it wasn't just an inscription, it was an invitation. The words on the wall began stirring hearts in ways that defied explanation. People who had been running from faith, who hadn't stepped inside a church in decades, began showing up. They came with curiosity, but what they found was something deeper, an encounter that would change them forever. It began with one man. He had lost his family, his purpose, and his will to believe. He came to the old church out of desperation, not devotion. But as he stood before the message carved in stone, Tears began to fall. He couldn't understand why. He said later that he didn't hear a voice, but he felt one. It wasn't condemnation. It wasn't guilt. It was love. A love that didn't need words to be known. He left that day different, lighter, freer, almost as if something had been lifted off his soul. Stories like his began spreading. People came from miles away, not because they wanted to see a miracle, but because they needed to feel one. Some said the air felt thicker, like you were walking through something holy. Others said they heard whispers in the silence, words of peace spoken straight into their hearts. No matter what form it took, the message always carried the same truth. Jesus was still here, and he had never left. You see, the true power of the hidden message wasn't just in what was written. It was in what it awakened. It reminded people that faith isn't something that lives in books or buildings. It's alive. It's the quiet assurance that even when we can't see him, even when the walls around us seem empty, his presence still lingers. It reminded people that maybe the miracles we long for aren't new ones. They're rediscoveries of what's always been true. And as the news spread, something even more profound began to happen. Division began to fade. People who hadn't spoken in years stood together in prayer. Denominations, differences, all the boundaries that usually separate us seemed to lose their importance. Because when you stand before a message written by the hand of time and illuminated by the breath of God, pride has no place. Only awe remains. That's the beauty of divine revelation. It doesn't point to itself, it points to him. Every heart that entered that church left carrying a piece of that revelation within them. The building didn't just hold history anymore. It held transformation. The walls that had once been cold and crumbling now pulsed with life again, as if the church itself had come back to life. And maybe it had. When people looked at those carvings, they didn't just see stone. They saw their own reflection, their own brokenness redeemed by love. It was as if the message on the wall was being written again. This time across the surface of human hearts. The ancient church had become a mirror of heaven's grace, and through it, people began to see that the same presence that filled those walls could fill them too. And that's when it became clear this wasn't just about what Jesus left in the church walls. It was about what he was leaving in the hearts of those who came. The hidden message wasn't just a revelation, it was a rebirth. And that's what happens when we finally realize he was never gone. We start to live like he's truly here. It's one thing to witness a miracle. It's another to live in the aftermath of one. When the message within the church walls was revealed, people expected the wonder to fade. They thought the attention would pass, that it would become just another story filed away in history. But what followed was far greater than anyone imagined. Because the message didn't stop at revelation. It began a movement. It started transforming not just hearts, but lives. You could feel it in the way people began to walk differently. Those who once carried shame in their posture now carried hope in their eyes. The small village where that church stood started to feel like a place reborn. Conversations changed. Neighbors began helping neighbors again. The sound of laughter returned to streets that had long fallen silent. It was as if heaven had cracked open the earth, just enough to let its light seep through, reminding everyone that even the most broken places could become altars of grace. One woman said she hadn't prayed in years, not because she didn't believe, but because she thought God had stopped listening. Yet when she stood before that wall, something within her broke. She whispered a simple prayer, not loud, not grand, just honest. If you're still here, I'm still yours. And in that moment, the weight she'd carried for years lifted. She said later that she felt peace, the kind that doesn't explain itself, but simply fills the room until you can breathe again. That's what happens when the presence of God moves from a story to an experience. It doesn't demand your understanding. It invites your surrender. The miracle in those walls became a mirror of what was happening inside the people who came. The more they uncovered the message, the more they discovered about themselves. It was as if the Spirit was whispering, "You too are a living message. My words are not only written in stone, but in you." The power of that realization spread like wildfire. Churches in nearby towns began to fill again. Pastors spoke with renewed conviction. Families started reading scripture together. It wasn't because of publicity or spectacle. It was because people had encountered something real. A tangible reminder that God had not abandoned his people, no matter how far they had drifted. That he was still writing his story, even in the cracks of human history. And through it all, something else began to change. The way people looked at each other. Compassion returned. Forgiveness became easier. It was as though the hidden message Jesus left in those walls was awakening his message within them. Love one another as I have loved you. You could see it in the way people reached out to the broken, embraced the forgotten, welcomed the prodigal. Just revival, it was restoration. The miracle had shifted from being something you could visit to something you could carry. People realized they didn't have to travel to that church to feel his presence. They could feel it in their own homes, their own struggles, their own moments of silence. Because once you've seen his hand in stone, you begin to see it in everything. In the sunrise, in a stranger's kindness, in the quiet moments of grace that remind you he's still near. And that's the beauty of what happened there. The message hidden in the walls didn't stay confined to that church. It became a living echo, resonating in hearts across the world, whispering the same truth again and again. He never left, and he never will. As time passed, what began as a local discovery became something much greater, something eternal. The story of the hidden message spread beyond that quiet village, reaching cities, nations, and hearts that had long grown cold. People began to realize this wasn't just about an old church and a few words carved into its walls. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that God's voice had never stopped speaking. It's just that we'd stopped listening. Those words, "I am still here," echoed like thunder through the hearts of millions. They reached the broken, the doubting, the weary, and the forgotten. For some, it was the first time they felt seen. For others, it reignited a faith that had nearly gone out. The miracle wasn't in the mystery of the church. It was in the way that simple truth began to ripple through people's lives. Because once you know that he's still here, everything changes. There was a man who had been living on the edge, completely lost. When he heard about the message, he didn't believe it. But something in him needed to see it for himself. He made the long journey, stood before that old stone wall, and stared at the faint words carved by hands long gone. He said later that he didn't feel a jolt, didn't see light, didn't hear angels sing, but he felt peace deep and undeniable. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't alone. That moment became the turning point of his life. That's what God does. He takes what's hidden and reveals it at the exact moment you need it most. The message wasn't just about his presence in a building. It was about his presence in us, in our pain, in our failures, in our waiting. Every scar, every season, every unanswered question, he's there. And sometimes he allows silence not to punish us, but to prepare us. Because revelation always comes to those who are willing to look closer, to listen deeper, to believe even when everything looks lifeless. What began as a discovery in one forgotten church became a symbol of hope across the world. Pilgrims came not to worship the wall, but to encounter the one who inspired it. And in that sacred exchange, they left with something greater than proof. They left with purpose. The truth is, the hidden message was never meant to stay hidden. It was meant to remind us that even when faith feels buried under the rubble of life, God is still speaking, still moving, still writing his story. The final revelation came not from the wall itself, but from what it awakened in those who believed. People began to carry that message into hospitals, prisons, schools, and homes. Wherever there was darkness, they brought light. Wherever there was despair, they spoke life. The phrase carved in stone became a living movement. A generation choosing to live like Jesus truly is still here. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not the discovery, not the carvings, not even the mystery, but the awakening. The way one hidden message reminded humanity that the presence of God was never confined to walls of stone, but written into the walls of every heart that dares to believe. Because at the end of it all, the message he left was not just found, it was fulfilled. He is still here. When that message was revealed, the words weren't about buildings or religion, they were about love, about a Savior who never stopped reaching out to his people. It said, "I never left." And maybe that's the message you've needed to hear. Maybe you've been walking through your own ruins, a broken dream, a silent season, a weary heart. Maybe you've wondered if God still speaks, if he still moves, if he still remembers you. Hear me tonight. He never left. His fingerprints are still on the walls of your life. His voice is still echoing through your story. The same Jesus who left that hidden message in the church walls has left one in your soul. And it reads, "I'm still here. I still love you. I still have a plan." So don't walk away from the ruins. Don't give up on what feels empty. Because sometimes the message you've been waiting for isn't gone. It's just been waiting to be revealed. The walls may be old, the paint may be faded, but his promise still stands. And when you finally see it, when your heart finally hears it, it will change everything. That's the hidden message Jesus left all along, and it's been waiting for you to read it.